There seem to be more accounts of it chasing people, terrorizing people.
There have been cases of Sasquatches going after humans as a food source.
From encountering a humanoid giant to almost getting torn apart by the creature, this is the terrifying encounter story of rangers who caged Bigfoot. Let's dive in. My name is Arthur, and I'm a Californian. I began my work as a ranger at Sequoia National Park in 1994, and at first, the job felt like a dream. Wide open forests, mountains that seemed endless, and air so clean it almost burned the lungs. But as the years passed, I came to understand that the forest held more than beauty. It held shadows, mysteries, and sounds that carried weight heavier than silence itself. I spent long hours alone, patrolling trails that visitors rarely touched, and though the quiet was something I thought I could handle, there were times when the quiet pressed in like a heavy hand, almost reminding me that I was only a guest in land that belonged to something much older than myself. By 1997, in my last year as a ranger, that feeling of being small beneath the trees had become something else entirely. Not just awe, but unease, because the woods seemed to listen back. And when you are alone enough times, you start to notice that the trees are never truly still, and the sounds that echo through them are not always what you expect.
The Sierra sounds are singularly important in the study of Sasquatches. The sounds represent a wide variety of very strange vocalizations that were emitted from unseen entities in the woods. It sounds like people actually speaking an unknown language.
That summer was hot, the kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back within minutes. On top of that, the air carried the sharp resin of pine mixed with the dry taste of dirt. And on some trails the smell was so strong it felt like it coated your throat. Yet that day, something else carried on the wind, a sense that the forest was holding its breath and waiting. Visitors had been leaving reports with the station about strange noises from a remote part of the park. It was not the usual warning calls of animals or the rustle of branches, but deep, vibrating sounds that rattled through the chest like a drum being struck somewhere out of sight. They were frightened enough to think a bear was roaming close to the camps. I had been given the patrol that morning, and although I told myself it was routine, that sense of unease crept with me even as I checked my gear. The Jeep parked under the fading shadow of the station roof, the tranquilizer rifle laid across the passenger seat, and the radio clipped at my side. All standard tools for a ranger, but suddenly feeling inadequate for reasons I could not put words to. I was used to driving alone, used to the narrow roads where the dust clung in clouds behind the tires. Yet that morning, as I turned the ignition, I remember thinking the sound of the engine was too loud, as if I was disturbing something I should not.
I knew exactly what we had on camera. It was proof to me and my dad, because who on a Tuesday night is a mile and a half into the woods running around with no flashlight?
The trail I followed wound deeper into the woods, the familiar branches closing overhead into a green ceiling, and as the tires crunched gravel, the insects fell silent, their chorus fading in waves until there was nothing but the hum of the Jeep and my own breathing. I felt my chest tighten against the weight of that silence. The reports had said the noises came at different hours, sometimes at night, sometimes at noon, and no ranger had yet tracked down the cause. However, I could not shake the thought that whatever made those sounds was waiting, and that I was heading closer to it with every turn of the wheel. The shadows on the ground shifted as the sun angled higher, patterns like bars across the dirt road, and with every bend in the path, I half expected something to be standing there. Massive and unmoving, and though nothing appeared, the dread only grew heavier. I kept one hand close to the rifle and the other gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, not because I expected a bear to burst from the brush, but because I felt certain that the forest itself was watching, aware of me in a way that defied reason. The Jeep rolled past thick undergrowth where the ferns grew shoulder high and the trees pressed together so close they formed walls of shadow. I thought of how easy it would be to vanish into them and never be seen again, a thought that lingered longer than it should have. I passed a section where the road curved sharply, and there the air felt stiller than ever, not a single bird call breaking it. Not even the flutter of wings. Being an experienced ranger, I knew in my bones that I had crossed into a part of the park that most avoided without needing to be told. I slowed the Jeep, the gravel under the tires crackling louder in the absence of any other sound, and I realized that I had not seen a sign of life for miles. No deer, no rabbits, not even the faintest print in the dirt, as if the animals themselves kept clear of this place. I thought about turning back, but the patrol was my responsibility, and the reports were recent enough that I told myself I had to push on. Yet every inch deeper into that road felt like stepping across a line into something older than the park, something that tolerated visitors but never welcomed them.
The Alaskan Triangle is a geographic area enclosed by 3 points: Juneau, Anchorage, and a town called Utqiagvik. Over the last 4 decades, literally thousands of people have gone missing in the wilds of Alaska. Hundreds of search parties have been organized, and very few of these people have ever surfaced.
By the time I reached the most remote part of the trail, the air itself seemed denser, as though it carried weight. I could feel sweat rolling down my neck, even though the shadows around me kept the sun from touching the ground. I glanced at the rifle, at the radio, at the cracked vinyl of the seat under me, and felt a tension I could not explain. A calm before something inevitable, and as the Jeep moved forward, I knew that this would not be just another patrol. It was like I was crossing into a threshold where the known world ended and something ancient and waiting began. The air felt humid and stale, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and old sap. As I stood by the open Jeep door with one foot still resting on the metal step, I felt as if I had been singled out, as if whatever kept this part of the park empty was no longer hidden. Then it came. A sound so unnatural that even my bones seemed to flinch, a low guttural growl that rattled my chest and sent a sharp ache up into the back of my skull. In that instant, the radio was useless. Nothing I could have said would have matched the terror swelling in my throat. The world sharpened in strange ways, every heartbeat pounding like a drum against my ribs, a metallic tang spreading across my tongue as though fear itself had a taste. And in the seconds that followed, I felt the unnatural certainty that I was no longer alone. I turned toward the sound, and through the lattice of branches and shadows, something immense stepped into view. A figure that should not exist, but stood there all the same, its body covered in a reddish-brown coat, tangled with dirt and twigs, its frame broader than any man I had ever seen. Its arms long enough that the hands hung with a weight that suggested power and intention. Those hands were not claws, not paws, but hands shaped like mine, only far larger, their span wide enough to close around my head and crush it without effort. And it was in that small detail that the horror truly bloomed, because I could not dismiss it as just another animal. It was something closer, something that crossed a line no human was ready to see crossed. My eyes climbed slowly to its face, each feature locking into my memory in painful clarity. The cheekbones pronounced beneath the coarse hair, the brow heavy and shadowed, and the nose flat and wide as if pressed into its skull. But it was the eyes that held me in place, deep set and burning with a look that was not empty or instinctual, but deliberate, aware, and assessing, like a predator choosing whether to strike. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of its breath, slow and shallow, yet carrying with it the weight of something calculating. I felt my body turn to stone, caught between the instinct to run and the sick knowledge that flight was useless, that I had already been chosen.
In Virginia, the Cherokee people had stories of giant hair-covered people-like things in the woods. They were doing the same sort of things as the people of the Pacific Northwest described. The most reasonable explanation for these different people describing the same animals is that they were describing the same animals. Sasquatches have a continent-wide distribution.
It shifted slightly, the movement so small I might have missed it had my senses not been sharpened by terror, and then its shoulders rolled back, the chest expanding as if it were preparing for something. The impression struck me that it had grown taller, not because it had, but because it carried itself with a sudden tension, standing more erect, filling the space between the trees with its mass. Each second that passed was unbearable. Breathing became difficult, my fingers twitching near my belt, yet frozen by the certainty that if I reached for the pistol, I would only invite what came next. And then, it broke the stillness. Not with a slow advance or a warning, but with a violent burst, a sudden charge that split the silence apart, its body surging forward in a blur of muscle and hair and impossible speed. The earth itself seemed to tremble under its weight, and in that explosion of motion, all my instincts screamed at once, tearing me free of the paralysis and reminding me that if I did not move immediately, I would not live to regret it. I ran into the Jeep as the forest erupted with violence. The slam came first, A thunderous collision that made the metal shriek like a wounded animal. The frame buckled and the window exploded into shards that caught the light before slicing across my arm and chest. And before I could even understand what had happened, the door was rattling against its hinges as though it had been struck by a battering ram. A hand, massive and twisted in its humanity, forced itself through the shattered window, the skin dark and stretched over cords of muscle, fingers ending in blunt nails that still looked sharp enough to tear. When it swiped the door, it left gouges so deep the steel seemed to peel open like bark stripped from a tree. The sound it made when it hit the edge of the window frame was worse than anything I had ever heard. A grunt that carried pain but was drowned in rage, a guttural explosion that made my ears ring, and as the echo lingered, the Jeep slanted sideways under the weight of the thing pressing against it. I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick and shaking, the small piece of metal slipping against my palm as if the vehicle itself wanted to deny me. Every shallow breath came too fast and broke into a wheeze as I tried to force air into my lungs. The seconds dragged while the roof above me groaned under a weight that should not have been possible.
An old newspaper report from 1892 reports a large, upright being with thick hair covering its head and shoulders. But the word Sasquatch didn't exist then. They chose to call it the wood booger. A lot of times people would say, "Now you don't go out in the woods at night because the booger will get you."
When the ignition finally caught, the Jeep came alive with a roar that ripped through the silence, the engine screaming in panic with me, and I slammed my foot down until the pedal could go no further. The tires spun for a moment on the dirt, spitting dust and stones before catching hard, and the whole vehicle jolted forward with a violence that rattled my bones. In the mirror, the forest blurred into streaks of green and black, and behind them something moved with impossible speed, keeping pace no matter how hard I pressed down. It wasn't running upright anymore, it was on all fours, its body bent into something monstrous, its arms pounding into the ground like the legs of a machine, each stride crushing saplings that snapped beneath it with a crack that echoed through the woods. The sound of its breathing carried over the engine, a deep animal rasp that came in bursts, raw and uneven, like it was getting closer with every second. I could feel the vibration through the wheel, through the ground, through me. The road twisted, and I wrestled the steering wheel, the tires screaming as the Jeep skidded around every curve, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard it hurt. Each time I thought I had broken away, I'd hear it again, pounding feet, the crash of branches, the growl that crawled under the sound of the wind. Then, through the dust and blur, I saw lights ahead. At first I thought it was the ranger station, but the glow wasn't steady. It flickered and flashed like fire. As I got closer, I saw shapes, movement, and for the first time in that nightmare, a trace of hope. I burst into the clearing and slammed the brakes so hard the Jeep fishtailed. Floodlights blinded me for a second before I realized what I was looking at. A line of rangers standing behind their trucks, rifles raised, the glint of silver traps and steel cages reflecting in the harsh white light. They were waiting. They had been waiting for it.
Over the course of that 3 months, we got 64 different vocalization recordings. The Ohio howl is the best and clearest among them.
The chief's face was pale under the light, and even from a distance I could tell this wasn't the same man who had mocked me weeks before. There was fear in his eyes, but behind it was something colder, something like resolve. He didn't wave, didn't yell. He just stood there frozen, watching the road behind me. They had heard it too. They knew it was coming. I slammed the Jeep into park and stumbled out, my legs barely holding me up, the air thick with exhaust and the smell of sap and sweat. Before I could speak, one of the rangers grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the trucks. He whispered something sharp and urgent that I barely caught. "Stay still, don't run, don't draw attention." That's when I realized what was happening. I was the bait. The forest behind me groaned like something alive, and the growl came again, closer, deeper, enough to make the ground hum under my boots. Every ranger stiffened. I could hear safeties clicking off, the rattle of metal as traps were readied, the slow, terrified breathing of men who knew they might not survive the next few minutes. The lights flickered once, and then, just beyond the tree line, it appeared. It stepped into the light, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Its hair was soaked with mud, long and clumped, hanging in ropes over its shoulders. Its skin was stretched and dark under the fur, muscles shifting like cords beneath it, and the smell that came with it was enough to choke me. Rot, blood, and something sweet like sap turned sour. The eyes were worse than I remembered. They weren't an animal's. They were aware. The creature stopped just at the edge of the light, its breath coming in slow, heavy gusts that fogged in the cold air, and it stared straight at me. It knew. Somewhere in that thing's mind, it understood I was the one who escaped, the one that got away. The air went still again, not a single insect or bird daring to make a sound. And then the chief shouted, his voice cracking, "Fire!" Gunfire ripped through the clearing, flashes lighting up the trees like lightning. The sound was deafening, echoing back through the forest in endless waves. The creature reared up with a scream that didn't sound human or animal, something between the two, a sound that scraped the inside of my skull. It staggered back but didn't fall, its arms swinging, tearing through the low branches as it charged forward. Bullets tore through the air and hit it, but it only slowed for moments, like it was fueled by pain instead of stopped by it. The Rangers broke formation. Some kept firing, others ran for cover, and one got too close. The thing's arm swung wide and caught him in the chest, throwing him through the air like a rag doll, his scream cut off before he hit the ground. The rest kept shooting, shouting orders that vanished under the sound of chaos.
A grizzled old woodsman named Bauman, who tells a tale of going into a secluded valley to trap beavers and other animals with two partners. Only one man got out. They saw a bipedal figure that stank really bad, leaving big footprints, and they shot at it, which is a bad idea. Don't shoot at a Bigfoot. They don't like it.
I stood frozen in the light, watching it crash closer, my body locked between the urge to run and the terror of moving. Someone shouted my name, and before I could react, hands pulled me back toward the trucks. I stumbled, fell, crawled, the dirt sticking to my palms as I heard the cage doors slamming into place and chains rattling. They had planned this. The whole clearing was a trap. The last thing I saw before I hit the ground was the creature, caught mid-charge, falling into a pit covered in steel mesh, its roar tearing through the air as the gates slammed shut above it. And for a moment, the whole forest seemed to hold its breath. The air after the cage slammed shut was thick with dust and smoke, and the forest seemed to close in on us, every shadow alive with the echo of what had just happened. The gunfire had stopped, replaced by the sound of metal creaking under pressure, chains snapping tight, and the faint wet sound of the creature's breathing rising from the pit. I pushed myself up from the dirt, my arms shaking, my chest burning with every breath, and the floodlights flickered above us like dying stars. The other Rangers were moving cautiously now, their boots crunching against gravel, their faces pale and streaked with sweat. No one spoke. The silence was worse than the noise had been because it meant we all knew something wasn't over yet. The creature was still alive. I could hear it moving in the cage, scraping against the steel, its breath a steady rasp that felt too close, too knowing. When I finally managed to stand, I saw the chief at the edge of the pit, his rifle shaking slightly in his hands, his jaw locked tight. The pit had been lined with reinforced bars and steel netting, but even that didn't look strong enough to hold what was inside. The light from the trucks hit the creature through the gaps in the metal, catching parts of it in flashes. I saw a shoulder first, covered in hair matted with dirt and blood, then an arm, too long, the fingers ending in blackened nails that bent like claws. When it turned, its face came into view, and for a moment, the whole clearing seemed to tilt. It wasn't just an animal. The shape of its skull, the way the light hit the eyes, the way its mouth moved as it breathed, it was all wrong, too close to humans, too aware. Its eyes glowed faintly in the reflection, not red or yellow but deep amber, like the last color of sunlight bleeding through the trees, and when they met mine, I felt everything in me freeze again.
The research community have noted for decades that there seems to be a connection between coyotes and Sasquatches. A lot of people were saying maybe the coyotes are following the Sasquatches around and waiting for scraps after the Sasquatch kills a deer or something like that. I think it's the opposite.
It didn't look confused or afraid. It looked angry, like it understood exactly what we had done. One of the Rangers stepped closer to the cage, holding a flashlight in a trembling hand, the beam landing square on its face. The creature didn't flinch, didn't blink. It just stared, slow breaths fogging the bars. Then it moved, so fast that the beam snapped away, and its hand shot out through the mesh, fingers wrapping around the light before crushing it like paper. The bulb burst, glass scattering, and the man stumbled backward, screaming as his hand came away bleeding from the shards. The rest of us didn't move. No one dared to fire again because it wasn't attacking, it was warning us. The smell coming from the pit grew stronger, thick with iron and rot, mixed with something that burned at the back of the throat. The ground around the cage trembled with every breath it took, as if the earth itself was holding it down. The chief barked orders, his voice shaking despite his effort to sound in control, and the men moved to secure the locks, wrapping more chains over the top, hammering steel pins into place. Each strike of the hammer echoed through the night, and with each one, the creature's breathing grew louder, faster, angrier. It pulled at the chains once, testing them, the sound of metal stretching like something alive, and the whole cage shifted an inch to the side. I stepped closer without realizing it, drawn to the sound, to the slow rhythm of its movement. From this close, I could see more details that I didn't want to remember. Patches of bare skin under the fur, scars old and new, thick veins running down its neck, pulsing like cables under pressure. Its chest rose and fell, massive and slow, and I could see the faint outline of ribs, the way its muscles tensed as if it was waiting for the right moment to strike again. I couldn't look away. Something in my mind told me that this wasn't the first time it had been seen, that it wasn't lost or curious, but hunting. It had followed me here not because I escaped, but because it wanted me to lead it to the rest.